Welcome back. You're now watching the political segment of the weekend show. We're discussing the 2019 Appropriation Bill. President Muhammadu Buhari on Monday, May 27, signed the 2019 Appropriation Bill into law. The 8.92 trillion budget approved by the National Assembly as against the 8.26 trillion estimate presented by the President on December 19, 2018 has highlights of 502 billion for statutory transfer, 2.2 trillion for debt services, 4.6 trillion for recurrent expenditure, 6.9 trillion for total revenue, and 2.9 trillion for capital expenditure. In an additional recommendation, the Senate approved a 10 billion fund to be drawn from service-wide votes to assist victims of Zamfara State. Joining us on today's program to discuss the appropriation bill, the budget, is...
We have with us a political commentator, a writer who is passionate about free speech, Mr. Anenih. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, guys.
We also have with us Eze Onyepere, a legal practitioner, lead director, Center for Social Justice, and a fiscal governance expert.
My pleasure.
It's also my pleasure to welcome Mr.Nee Akinsiju, who is an investment analyst and chairman Buhari Media Organization. Welcome to the weekend show.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
Gentlemen, 6.6 trillion was budgeted in 2018 as the total revenue. Only about half of that, 3.9 trillion, was generated. Yet in 2019, we have about 7 trillion budgeted as the total revenue. What are your thoughts on this? And do you believe we'll be able to attain this? I'll start with you, Mr. Eze.
Well, we suffered a 45% decline in the revenue that was expected in 2018. And we're also here again making further projections, which is even beyond that. I do not think, with the utmost respect, and looking at the trajectory of what had happened in previous years, because the bulk of the money, about 50-something% to 60%, is expected from oil revenue. And we've always done a projection of 2.3 million barrels a day. In the last 3-4 years, we've never hit 2.3 million barrels. Currently, we are doing about 1.9. So you're having a deficit of about 400,000 barrels every day, and you look at the price and see the challenge. Also, the resources expected from the non-oil sector had always not materialized, because there are also a lot of expectancies, money expected from recoveries and other things, taxes, value-added tax, companies' income tax, most of the time is always below the projection that was made for them. So I think that we may still suffer the fate of last year if nothing drastic happens.
Interestingly, Niyi, just like he has said, we tend to repeat the same things, and so we have a budget with a proposed expenditure of 8.9 trillion and an expected revenue of 6.9, which means there's automatically a deficit of 1.86 trillion. So if we know this happened in the last year, it should have helped us forecast for our budgeting for 2019. But we are still going to have a deficit. Why are we increasing the budget? Because for a fact, we know, for instance, State House budget, for one, has close to 1 billion naira for travels for the president. There's the State House Medical Center, and they are building a new presidential wing. Coming from the government, which has a change, and we need to be more careful about our spending, what we see here is an increase, and these are the numbers we've seen in the budget. How does this really play out?
I think it's also about treasury management. When you do your budget, you set your targets, and you also, of course, calibrate how you want to achieve that target. Your drive and your momentum is actually determined by your targets. That's one. Then two, what we have are unrealized potentials. We have potentials, but they are unrealized. So if you set a 2.3 million barrels a day for yourself, and in the past, we've actually attained up to 2.5 million barrels. It means there's just some structural issues that needed to be attended to. It also means that we have the potential to attain that, And of course, if you are lucky, and you have a price, crude oil price, matching good crude oil price, matching increased production, you are able to attain it. So that's one of the treasury management I'm talking about. In the areas of the non-oil revenue, we have seen increased in capacity, either from the FIRS, and of course other activities in the SME sectors and all that. So it's because we have also seen the movement of collections by the revenue collectors. It also translates to mean that we only need to increase capacity to be able to bring in more fund, more revenue. So yes, there are traditional historical limitations to our capacity to garner the expected revenue. But again, with discipline, and I think that is the driving force of the government, with discipline, with commitment, and of course, adaptation of technology.
Well, Mr.Nee, you would agree with me that besides capacity, there is also an indication of poor planning. For example, we've pegged the benchmark of oil for $60 a barrel. How realistic is that?
In the since the president took the bill to the National Assembly, oil had not fallen below $60. So it's also about protection. In fact, at the point in time, it went as high as $73.
So you believe the $60 will sustain us for the next 4 years?
Yes, again, of course, if you... It's a dynamics of projection, and that's why I'm talking about treasury management. It's a dynamics of projection. You are not looking just at one scenario. You are looking at a multiple dimensional scenarios in arriving at that price. And of course, what is at issue is the movement, of prices. And we have seen that over the last 6 months, we have not even gone below that. We have been moving up.
Okay, let me bring you in here. Do you agree with Mr. Nee?
Mr.Nee talked about unrealized potential. I think, just riding on what he said, this is an unrealistic budget. We talk about $60 per barrel. And I want to talk about $60 per barrel point specifically because it wasn't even Buhari that proposed that, was the National Assembly. I think he proposed a lower benchmark of 40.
It's a 60. They didn't touch it.
No, they did. They increased it.
They did not touch it.
No, they did.
They did not.
The barrel
National Assembly did not touch it.
They did. They actually altered the budget. I think they increased it by even 300 billion.
No, they increased
90.
Yeah, they increased the budget. So it was altered. And I make that point to make this point that the budget isn't the president's. The National Assembly submits a bill, which is the budget, to the president for him to assent. So there's shared responsibility. So when I say it's an unrealistic budget, I'm not castigating the presidency alone. I'm saying the National Assembly has a responsibility. So for instance, we have projections of GDP 3 point something. We're currently 2. We have projections of single-digit inflation. We're currently double-digit. Like Mr. Eze said, we're projecting 2 point. Dr. Eze said.
No, Mr.
Mr.
Well, you can call me doctor.
we can take that.
I'll take it now.
I heard that you didn't correct it.
So, like Dr. Eze said, the budget projects $2.3 million per 2.3 million barrels per day.
Yeah.
We've never hit that. This administration has never hit that. Interestingly enough, we actually are a member of OPEC who has set a cap of, I think, 1.6 million barrels per day.
And we are doing about 25%.
And we're already doing above that already.
Yeah.
And now we're projecting another 25% above that. So it's an unrealistic budget. Our deficit is already more than capital expenditure. I mean, our debt servicing is already more than capital expenditure. And there's a deficit we're adding to that.
Interesting perspective, but would you put the onus of that solely on the president or also on the National Assembly, given the fact that the president actually accused them of padding the budget? You know, this issue of padding budgets, like what exactly, how do we come to some sort of agreement of what this means? The National Assembly, as Osei said, is meant to make adjustments to the budgets, right? So is there any such thing as padding budgets? Let me bring you in.
Let me start from the size of the budget. Although we say it is unrealistic, this budget is nothing compared to the population of Nigeria. You are talking about 8.9 trillion, which is roughly $29.1 billion. And if you work it out per capita, you are talking of less than 44,500 per Nigerian. And 44,500 is roughly about $130 or so, which is nothing. Where they earn minimum wage of $15 an hour for barbing here in the US, this is what somebody earns in a day. That's what it comes out per capita. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that our leaders need to become more creative, to work more, to tap potential revenue sources. We can't continue with this potential until Jesus Christ is about to come back. For instance, we have Niyi reporting that on a yearly basis we are losing about $1.6 billion from refusal to renegotiate the production sharing agreements, which by law we should have done more than 15, 20 years ago. $1.6 billion, if you add it, we are discussing about 600 billion naira extra, which is more than the capital expenditure of many MDAs. Now you see the petroleum industry reform bills, whether it's governance, whether it's administration, whether it's the fiscal part of it, whether it's community and relations and environment. We've sat on this bill since Obasanjo's days. And other countries that have enacted theirs have liberalized their petroleum industry and are getting more money from it. And we've refused to do that. We've had stamp duties going back and forth, people collecting money every time you do a transaction in the bank, not accounted for. So there are so many other ways. Nigeria is beyond an $8.9 billion, 8.9 trillion naira budget. We should be doing not less than 20, 25, 30. Go and check the budget of Egypt, check the budget of South Africa, check the budget of Angola with lesser population, and they're doing more. Now, if we have to talk about pardon, I think what is happening is that men and women who are matured are behaving like kids and they've refused to learn. The Constitution says what the president brings before the National Assembly is an estimate, like any other bill. And the power of the pause, the power of approval, the power of making the law belongs to Parliament, which is the legislature. Now, but from the way budgets are structured, making a budget is like making a baby. So the man and the woman must sit down to cooperate. Yeah. Even if you don't cooperate, even if it's artificial insemination, something must give. So if you sit down there and say, oh, the budget is mine, as the executive, I propose, you don't talk to them, you don't engage them. That's what happens in Nigeria. They will say, okay, we're waiting for you. Finish your business. We are here. We are the final authority. So you have this disconnect. There should be talking, taking order into confidence at such an early stage in the budget process, so you have that understanding that when the budget comes to the National Assembly, it will be more or less a done deal. Every year we hear about legislatures putting in projects, constituency projects. We all agree that legislators must put in constituency projects. So at what stage do they bring it in? Is it at the stage the executive have finished, or do you allow them to go to the MDA so that all the feasibility tests, all the studies, technical studies, environmental studies should have been done so that as they put it in, is ready to go? Most times it doesn't happen. So the gentlemen in the legislature say, okay, since you don't want to talk to us, do your own thing. We are here waiting. When you finish, we do our own thing. But that's not the way to go.
But I must
So
say
there is nothing like budget padding, because the legislature has the power of approval. And the bill is not supposed to come out from the legislator the way you sent it in, unless that's how they feel. They have the constitutional power.
So to an extent, I do agree with you, because it is a handshake. And so even when the budget is proposed, that's where they have budget defense, where the MDAs come and defend the budget. And it happens over years. This current budget was delayed because some MDAs didn't come to defend it. However, while we tackle that issue, we still have the fact that our debt profile is constantly increasing. And so, Niyi, we've seen that this government, quite commendable, has contributed a lot to servicing our debt profile. But in the same vein, we service this debt and then we take more loans. How does this help the future of Nigeria?
I will come to that, but let me quickly address some concerns raised by Jose, especially on our production numbers. Don't forget that at the time, in 2016, our production fell to as low as 580,000 barrels a day. Now that tells you there would have been a strong assault on our production structure over time, and you will need to start a period of rehabilitation, the process of rehabilitation and all that. So to ramp up production over the last 30 months to as high as 1.9 itself is a challenge, and it should be commended, because when you fall that low, to move up to that level is a big challenge. That is one. Then two, OPEC quota does not really impact Nigeria. If it's going to be taken at the face value, you'll be looking at 44,000 barrels a day from what we have, from our allocation, from our quota. But even beyond that, is the fact that we have a normal 1.8 million barrels allocated to us by OPEC. The extra that makes up our 2.3 is made of condensate. Condensate is just associated oil in the gas, gas and oil in the oil well. So it's not taken as a formal OPEC quota.
But the petroleum minister actually admitted that we are 25% above the quota assigned to us. So even if it's not necessarily the same thing, we have admitted, which means the numbers are the numbers, and the person in charge has
nobody,
admitted to this.
OPEC would not accuse us of overproducing. And I've just explained why. Will not accuse us. So now what we need to do is still to ramp up production up to that level. And that's a potential. Doc here that is refusing to be a doc, I'd explained, I'd explained, the other opportunities that are available. For instance, the production sharing quota, the production sharing contract, that had been passed, a very good judgment had been taken by the Supreme Court, and I think working the states, the federal government and the concerned states are working on it. And I hope that is also a source of income, as it were. What has been the major problem with Nigeria had always been revenue side of the budget. And that's why we've been talking about diversification and all that. And it has been an historical thing. I've been discussing economic-related issues perhaps since the early 90s. And we have always been talking about diversification.
So debt servicing and our debt profile.
Yes, this is the basis. It is because we have challenges on the revenue side of our budget. That's why we are talking of debt, of securing debt always. But of course, I don't see anything wrong with collecting debt. It's a major sine qua non, if I want to use that word. For development, yes. It's a major one. It is what, if you can, even in basic business, in your basic business, the process of your expansion is about securing loans,
Securing loans and paying them back. Securing loans in measurement with development. But what we are doing right now in Nigeria is just increasing our debt revenue and not paying these back up.
Just to put a clarification.
Sorry. No, before you do that, a 500 million euro bond was collected 2013 or 2014. This Buhari just paid that back, I think 3 or 4 months ago.
Which is why we said it's commendable.
Yeah, so she was raising an issue of not paying back. I'm saying that was collected 5 years time.
Keeps rising,
No, for me, it is either you do that if you don't have enough at this point in time, and you have a 30 years deficiency, infrastructural deficiency on you, and we are talking of an estimate of $100 billion to bridge the infrastructural gap.
What's infrastructure? Because that's the issue.
The clarification I'm trying to make is that government is a continuity. We are not looking at particular say administration A or B. There is a huge challenge in borrowing. Not that borrowing is bad per se. We have borrowed up to the extent that we are using about 66-67% of our revenue to pay back debt. So for every 1 naira Nigeria makes today, actual money we get from our crude oil, value-added tax, any tax at all, we use 67 kobo out of 100 kobo to pay back debt. So people have always made this mistake of saying debt to GDP. You don't use GDP to pay back debt. You use revenue. So debt to revenue is at a breaking point. And I want to make this clarification. It is not like you must borrow to develop. Borrowing is not the only way of funding infrastructure and developmental projects. It is just one out of so many ways. So if you have about 3 pathways to go, and you choose only one, and you are projecting it to be the only one, then there is a problem. There are other ways, like more of public-private partnerships, more of even what I call the popular capitalism model to build their infrastructure. Let me give you a typical example. Look at our power sector. How comatose is it? People took over, and they have no money to invest. Did you remember how our banks were before Soludo came in? and said, I'm going to recapitalize the banks. Everybody shouted, 25 billion is too much. But the way he made it look, went to the stock exchange, buying shares became a topic in the churches and in the schools and in the marketplaces. Market women and ordinary people bought in, and the banks were recapitalized in such a record time. Can we not have special purpose vehicles and ways for people to invest in the power sector since there's no money there? Must we borrow? Now we borrowed money to build Lagos-Ibadan Railway. The same $2 billion we borrowed for 160-something kilometers of road is the same thing Ghana borrowed to do 354, more than double the kilometers. And we're not putting these things in the public domain. So my assertion is that we have other means of raising revenue which will be cheaper for us beyond continued borrowing. At least we found an example in the aviation sector, what Mr.Nee did in Lagos. And okay, after he even did it, he's had problems with all kinds of government agencies. The Supreme Court has even said, hands off, giving the free hand. Nobody's obeying that judgment right from the days of previous governments. He even had a concession to do that Lagos-Ibadan expressway. He was simply to go and look for money. And the money wasn't going to come from Nigerian banks. Sign up for him at the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing so that he can get the technical papers, sovereign guarantee, and go to Europe, America, Asia to get the money. They sat on it and we are demanding funny things
where do you stand on this? I want to hear your opinion because we ran out of time.
I'm here to land on
Sorry, let him just respond, then we'll give you another.
Between both of them,
okay.
I think there's a role for debt in development. I admit that the infrastructural deficit is huge, so debt must play a part. But I do also agree that with Dr. Eze that this should be led by the private sector. And it seems the current administration is maybe more socialist than private sector, than capitalist, and is averse to what I would say thinking outside the box. So for instance, we've had a maybe 30-minute conversation on oil. And oil only makes maybe 8% or 10% of our GDP. Agriculture makes 20-something percent. Industries 20-something percent. Services is 51 or 52%. If government, so forget oil, if government said they're not going to take a single penny from oil and found a way to tax the productive sectors of the economy, agriculture, industry, services, and even expand it, push policies that promote growth in those industries, in the non-oil sector, Nigeria will not have a debt problem. But we seem so fixated with oil and NNPC and production quotas, and they will not solve our problem. We do have a debt crisis. The infrastructure, the deficit in budget will only make it worse. And I say that we are partisans, but we are also Nigerians. The government does need to look at that problem. It's a problem that will outlive this administration.
Mr.Nee, 30 seconds to respond because we've run out of time. Please.
I still insist that we have a huge infrastructural deficiency. We need to create the enablement to diversify the economy. And infrastructure is important, and we are talking into infrastructure. We're not just talking about roads. We are talking about electricity. We are talking about health and all that. So it's not just about the mortar and the cement that you see. It's also about the soft. How do you present yourself in a public hospital? It's also about education and all that. So if you are talking of $100 billion deficit, and you need to produce this in the next 10 years. How do you do? Yes, those creative other sources of revenue could come, but there is a limitation to the capacity of the productive sector already that needs to be opened and unleashed through the enablement of the environment. How do we do this? The easiest immediate solution is secure loan, borrow money, but apply it in the most honest and transparent manner.
Dr. Eze, your final words?
Yeah, when you borrow, you also remember you have to pay back. We borrowed to construct the Abuja-Kaduna railway line, but we are also subsidizing it for it to run. We are not even doing cost recovery. What kind of economics is that?
Same with power sector.
Yeah, we borrowed to build that rail line. We are not even doing cost recovery. And we need money to pay back. So where's the money going to come from? So if you are going to borrow, think through how you pay back, because pay back, you must pay. And the Chinese are noted to take over infrastructure projects when you don't pay back. It's happened in some parts of, whether it's Zambia or some other parts of Africa. So we should be thinking of that day if we don't know how to pay back.
Say your final
My
words.
final words are that a budget should be a signal of intent for the government in power. So Mr.Nee was talking about education, and education barely gets 7% of the budget. He mentioned health. Health barely gets 4% of the budget. And these are issues for Nigeria. Education, health, security, and infrastructure should be the priorities, number 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the budget. That's not reflected in this budget, so I don't know which realities it was written in.
Most definitely, and to be specific, the Ministry of Works, Power and Housing has a 4.2 billion budget. Healthcare has 3.7 billion. Education, I believe, has even less than that, which has about 6.3 billion. So this is definitely.
I don't think those figures are right.
It is actually. So
pick,
the education.
You must pick the capital leg of it and the recurrent leg of it.
I think this could possibly be percentages. So
perhaps you are talking about percentages.
No, but all the same.
Well, all the same is still not enough.
No,
giving a population.
The reason for being enough is revenue.
The money is not
revenue,
the
which
money is
debt
not there.
is still not being able to
No,
solve
you
solely.
need something.
We still have
You need something to trigger
Nee,
something.
but if you recall, I started by saying we have £1 billion for the president's travel. We have close to another 500 million for the State House clinic. So, like
we
Ose
also
said,
have the subsidy.
yes.
The
So
300
another
billion
500
for-
million for fixing of cars and replacing. Like Ose said, the transparency and the intent on implementation is extremely key. While we see the good intentions and we commend certain aspects, we need to be flexible and more transparent, even from that budgeting process.
It's
before it
important.
comes
I
to
agree. For me,
implementation.
transparency is if I am backing securing loan debt, I am backing it because I believe transparency at the utmost level will be applied. You know, you don't borrow money and play with it. Unfortunately, that had been our history. You know, but if what we are seeing now is there's a shift, there's a paradigm shift, we will encourage it.
Well, we would love to keep this conversation going, and we hope you will exceed when next we call on you to join us on the weekend show. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll take another short break right now. When we return, social media trends. Don't go anywhere.